Ici Londres.
Ask yourself one question. If Britain were not already a member of the European Union, would you vote to join it? Okay, it's never easy to answer these hypotheticals, but just for the sake of illustration, let's consider the state of opinion in those Western European countries that are not in the European Union. Probably the three most comparable cases to us are Norway, Iceland and Switzerland, in the sense that these are neither microstates nor former communist countries, but they're all outside the EU. In Iceland, which formally withdrew its application in 2015, voters opposed joining by 50.1% to 34.2%. In Norway, the feeling's even more emphatic, 72.0% to 18.1%, a balance, by the way, that's barely changed in over a decade. In Switzerland, opinion polls on the EU are rarer, because membership was widely seen to have been killed off when a referendum in 2001 resulted in a massive 76.8% against reopening accession talks. Still, for what it's worth, the latest survey shows that 82% of Swiss citizens support their current bilateral arrangements. Now, none of these countries has a perfect deal with the EU. Of course they don't. Perfection is not of this world. But they all plainly prefer, by huge majorities, their current kind of associate status, their free trade only deal, to what we have, which is the supremacy of EU over national law. Let's ask the question again. If we were not already in the EU, would we now vote to join? The leader of the Norwegian No campaign in their 1994 referendum was also the leader of the Centre Party, and she raised a question which never really found a proper answer. She said, to what problem is the EU a solution? Now, back in 1975, during our only previous referendum, there did seem to be a problem. That problem was the sclerosis of the post-war British economy. We'd finished the Second World War with a massive debt. We spent 3 decades inflating that debt away. It was a constant drag on growth, and the result was hugely detrimental to our competitiveness and our productivity. By the 70s, we'd reached the era of the 3-day week, of constant strikes, of double-digit inflation, of power cuts. People looked across the channel and they thought, oh, plainly these guys have got something right. Western Europe had spectacularly outperformed Britain and her Commonwealth in the years following 1945. Actually, in retrospect, our timing could hardly have been worse. Western Europe's post-war economic miracle, the so-called Wirtschaftswunder, pretty much came to an end with the oil shock of 1974, just as we were joining. The growth since that year has been overwhelmingly in non-European markets, not least in those English-speaking common law markets from which we had crazily stood aside when we adopted the EU's common external tariff in the 1970s. Every region of the world is now growing except one. There is growth in North America, in South America, in Asia, in Africa, in Australia. But incredibly, the Eurozone is still the same size economically that it was in 2008. In 1980, the EU, or at least the 28 members of the EU as they now are, accounted for 30% of world GDP. Today, it's 17%. And if you look just at the Western European countries, the 15 members of the EU prior to the 2004 enlargement, then that proportionate decline is stronger. Still, this is no place for a country like ours, a trading maritime nation connected to every continent and archipelago. So I'll ask for the last time. If we were not already members of the EU, would any serious mainstream politician or economist now be suggesting that we tie ourselves to the only trade bloc in the world that isn't experiencing any economic growth? I realize that the status quo is a powerful thing. It's very difficult to win a referendum when you're arguing for change. People are naturally risk-averse. Behavioral psychologists have written libraries of books explaining why it is that we'll make irrational decisions to stick with what we have when there is something better on offer. But really, this is something a lot better. A vision of a global Britain, living under its own laws, prospering as the prosperity of more distant continents spills over into the British economy. We deserve that chance.